Hey, everybody. I just wanted to talk to me and y'all for a little bit at the start here, and we'll get to Bill Kristol in a minute. There are a lot of things that were making me very angry over the weekend in the fallout from Charlie Kirk's assassination. Among them are the fact that I see almost nobody discussing the gun culture that this young man was steeped in, and that is being ignored and being considered irrelevant to this conversation for some reason. I'm upset about how stupid the punditry is about the online subculture this killer was steeped in, and we're going to be talking more about that this week. I'm angry about the despicable attacks on trans people, the incitements to civil war I've seen from prominent people on the right, Ted Cruz's creepy AI slop tributes to Charlie Kirk, RFK claiming Kirk was his soulmate. I could go on. There's a lot pissing me off about how supposedly responsible leaders in the MAGA world have acted. And I'm going to be covering all of that and more on this podcast and in the weeks ahead. And by the way, that's one more thing that I'm angry about, that I have to steep myself in this assassination coverage for the foreseeable future. And that's something that makes me angry at the killer, frankly. And before we get to all that, with Bill Kristol, there's one other thing that I'm really upset about and that really shook me this weekend, and I want to talk about that with you. The number of people who I've encountered who told me some variation of Charlie had it coming is deeply, deeply alarming and upsetting. And it's something that has really kind of shaken me to my core. And before I talk about those folks, I just want to be clear about who and what I am not talking about. I'm not talking about people who are posting their strong disagreements with Charlie, lifting up his past noxious comments or any of that. It's perfectly appropriate to speak the truth about his role in our national discourse, to express strong disagreement with him, with the TPUSA mission. It's a free country, or at least it's supposed to be still. So I have no qualm with folks expressing their political disagreements with him. I'm also not talking about the algorithmically delivered sludge from random strangers that Elon and the Chinese are elevating into my For You page, and I've seen some pretty fucking nasty stuff on there, but I'm not letting that get to me. And I'm not, it's important to say, talking about the Democratic Party or Democratic leaders who have been acting extremely responsibly throughout all of this, at times in contrast to their GOP counterparts, and certainly in contrast to how their GOP counterparts acted following the attack on Paul Pelosi and others. So I think that it is important that I distinguish the thing that is upsetting me about some on the left from what is happening in the leadership of the Democratic Party. Because a lot of my criticism of the Republican Party is how leaders responded to pressure from voters that was pushing them in a direction that they knew to be wrong. And so I appreciate the Democratic leaders for acting responsibly over the last few days. But what I am talking about, the thing that is getting me really upset, it's coming from people that are real, that either I know or I know to be not inauthentic. It's coming from people I follow posting things like, "Hey, fascist, catch." Had to unfollow a couple people on that. Coming from people that I follow on Instagram, posting pretty gleefully. It's coming from the people that follow the show and comment on our posts at times. And it's coming from people in real life that I met at a bar. That's right. On Friday, I was watching my friend DJ, and there was somebody that I've met before but don't really know that well. And they came up to me and, apropos of nothing, told me that they have French ancestors and they know what it's like to fight the fascists, and they're happy that this fascist is dead. Someone volunteered that to me at the bar. And I had a couple other people say something not quite as gross, but close to the same ballpark. I don't know what signals I sent to the universe that led someone to decide that I was a person they should confess that they're pro-assassination to. But let me be clear. Don't fucking do that. I consider anyone who is pro-assassination of Charlie Kirk a foe, even if we voted for the same person in the last election. I know we discussed this last week, and I know that probably some folks are sick of it, and that's fine. You can fast forward to Bill. But I wanted to one more time explain why this is also important to me. Number one, just fundamentally, this is wrong. I believe that when people ask me about what my ideology is now that I left the Republican Party, I always come back to this one phrase. I believe that people should have an opportunity to live a life of purpose and meaning if they choose to, and that the government should do what it can to foster it and do what it can to protect people from threats to that. Maybe another way to put it, threats to their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's my North Star. And I guess it should go without saying, but I'll say it explicitly, that you can't live a life of purpose and meaning if you get gunned down on a campus. I also think that people should have the chance to grow and change and find that meaning. It's kind of something that I've been thinking about. It's striking that on Friday I had David Frum on this podcast. Today I had Bill Kristol. And I wonder what some of the people gleefully posting about Charlie would have said if one of them had been assassinated 20 years ago. Because it sure seems like some people that like Bill Kristol now would have been at least neutral to that 20 years ago, if recent reactions are any signal. And that's a disturbing thought to have. It's a disturbing thought to have. And let me tell you, I've had a lot of people tell me they thought that they hated Bill Kristol when he was on the Sunday shows. They watched him growing up, or they watched him as they were getting involved, as they were, coming into age, into adulthood, and they didn't like his views on a lot of issues, and that, because of this podcast and because of other things, they've just come to see him for what he is. I mean, it's self-deprecating and thoughtful and a great father and grandfather and somebody who cares about this country. And I'm not saying that Charlie Kirk was any of that, but I'm just saying that, I think that it's important to allow people the space to demonstrate who they are, allow people the chance to grow and learn and change. Some people change for the worse, some people change for the better. This is part of the human experience. And I would think that people who thought that Bill Kristol was an enemy and have come to find him charming and lovable and thoughtful might kind of think twice about the one-dimensional way in which they view a 31-year-old who got assassinated. I'd secondly like to say that even if it wasn't morally reprehensible to support assassination or to give comfort to assassination, it is morally reprehensible. But even if it wasn't, does anybody think that this worked or helped the anti-MAGA or anti-fascist cause? If you were that guy at the bar and you think that the right thing to do is to fight and defeat fascism in all its forms, does it seem like that happened over the last week? Because I don't know. I think if you're a real anti-fascist, you should be furious at the man that just empowered the fucking fascists. From the LSU game on Saturday, where I had to watch a flyover about Charlie Kirk, to reports from friends at church services about how priests were talking about Charlie Kirk, to the NFL tributes, to social media feeds, Charlie Kirk is now a martyr. People who had never heard of Charlie Kirk are now hearing these hagiographies and these tributes to him. People that had never heard of Charlie Kirk in my section around me at Tiger Stadium on Saturday were cheering and whooping and hollering for him. It sure doesn't seem to me like the anti-fascist cause was advanced in any way. And you got Stephen Miller, little Gollum in the White House, talking about how to use this to crack down on anti-fascist groups, on liberal groups, on activist groups that are working to oppose the MAGA cause, to advance the progressive agenda. Now the arm of the government is planning on cracking down on them even more. Doesn't seem to me like any anti-fascist objective was met this weekend. Seems like the opposite. And how about the trans folks? Do you think that the trans roommate of the shooter thinks that this made their life or the life of trans people safer or better? Because I fucking don't. I really worry for the safety of that person, for their future. I worry for all of trans folks right now. I think that we're already in an ugly period for them, and I think that it's about to get worse. And while TPUSA was definitely hostile to trans Americans, I don't think that what happened in Utah is going to do anything to make their lives better. Doesn't fucking seem like it to me, at least. The other political thing about this that makes me think about is last year when people were asking me like where we're going, I said one of my worries that we're going to a place similar to in Ireland with the Troubles. Like, not that we have a real civil war, but there'd be, just spates of violence, of political violence cropping up in this country. And a lot of times, this was before Trump had won again, in my head I was envisioning, I don't know, Kamala Harris being president and that there would be spates of MAGA violence and domestic terrorism. And obviously we've seen some of that still. I guess the worst case scenario I can think of is a world where the MAGA nationalists are in charge, the fascists are in charge, and there are spates of anti-fascist violence, martyring them and empowering them further and creating a cycle that allows them to use their power to crack down even more. That seems like the worst possible case scenario. And it seems like there's some people out there on the activist left that want to careen us towards that. Maybe not that many people, but too many people for comfort. One more thing about why this has hit me so hard. I genuinely believe what I say on this podcast, which is why you're getting this rant. I genuinely believe all the reasons that I've given you about why I left the GOP, why I upended my life, why I thought that the illiberalism of Donald Trump was such a threat to the country. I'm never offering arguments here as a pose or as some kind of, triple bank shot, clever way to get back at MAGA. I don't pretend to have views. I oppose illiberalism in all its forms. I oppose the violent rhetoric that Donald Trump reinserted into our politics. I oppose the ill treatment of political foes and the dehumanization of political foes that he advanced. I oppose the way in which they want to take away the rights of political enemies. None of this is a pose or positioning. Okay. And so when I oppose illiberalism coming from Trump, that I'm not going to then flip around to the other side and say I love or I defend or I understand illiberalism from the other side. Let's just give you a specific example of this. There's the case of Kilmar-Abrego Garcia this year. It's something that I was really upset about and talked about a lot. This notion that somebody could have their life taken from them, that they could be grabbed and sent to a foreign torture prison without due process just because the government or some people in the government did not like what he stood for. On the right, there was a big conversation on Fox and other places among Republican politicians that I found disgusting about how, Kilmar Garcia beat his wife or whatever. He was a trafficker. Or he sold drugs. He was a drug dealer. And what I would say to that is, okay, sure, prove it. Prove it. Take him to court. We have a rule of law in this country. If that is true, then find legal remedies for dealing with this problem like we do in a liberal democracy. Within the construct of a liberal democratic system, of the rule of law, of a democracy, you can't just say that guy's a wife beater, so I get to send him to a torture prison camp. You have to prove it. You have to go to a jury. You have to prosecute him. Like, whether or not he's a bad person or whether or not he's a person that's done bad things is irrelevant to an autocrat wanting to snuff out his rights and send and in some cases, if people hadn't objected, if people hadn't pushed back, this Republicans and MAGA and Donald Trump was happy to essentially end Kilmar Garcia's life. At the time, nobody had gotten out of Sukkot. It was pressure from the courts, pressure from lawyers, pressure from activists, pressure from the media, pressure from politicians that led him to be able to get his day in court. And this is all still ongoing. This is a fight that's still ongoing. My point is, it was like, what I said at that time is it didn't matter whether I disagreed with his behavior. He still needed to be treated as a human who has rights in this country. So everybody on the left that I could see fully agreed with that argument. That was an argument a lot of people advanced, right? So it's hard for me to understand how you could say, unless you were faking it, right? Unless you could say, if you said, I believe that somebody that allegedly beat his wife and sold drugs and trafficked people, should not have their rights taken away from them, should not be sent to a torture prison, then I don't understand how you can flip it around and say, well, I don't care that much if somebody with bad opinions got killed, got assassinated. That doesn't work for me. Like the inverse of that doesn't compute. Okay. Like Charlie Kirk had a lot of opinions I disagreed with. We argued all the time. I would go every Christmas. I went and argued with people at his TPUSA function, and we met and we would talk and argue and tease each other. Like he had bad opinions, some real ones. We live in a country where people are allowed to have bad opinions freely, and where they do not need to be afraid. They should not be afraid that somebody will do a summary execution on them because they didn't like their opinions. So for me, these liberal democratic principles that applied to Comar Abrego Garcia also apply in spades to Charlie Kirk. And I got to tell you, I don't think you are a liberal. You might say you're a liberal, but I don't think you're a liberal if you're neutral on the topic of stochastic political terrorism. All right. And I don't think that you're in the no, let me correct that. I know you're not in the pro-democracy coalition if you are neutral on someone getting murdered while practicing open debate. Being for liberal democracy means standing up for the rule of law, standing up for people to have the ability to express their views in public on a college campus, even if their views are noxious, even if you disagree stridently with their views, even if you think that their views are a plague on the country and the youth. It doesn't matter. Being for democracy means you are for their ability to express them, and that you will push back on them in the public square. You will try to push back on them at the ballot box. You will encourage people to go out and vote against that worldview. That is what being in the pro-democracy coalition is. And frankly, if you want to really define yourself as being pro-democracy, it is especially true that people who have views you disagree with are protected, that they are safe to express them. And so anyway, that's that. As you can tell, this is something that I care very deeply about. It is frankly at the core of why this exists, why this project exists, why this Bulwark exists, because my outrage and horror at Trumpian illiberalism is what made me decide that I need to speak out against it and act out against it and organize against it, right? At the time, I was considering maybe I just quit politics and, I don't know, go be a PR guy for a corporate law firm or something, or a corporate, some company's PR man, right? I was living in Oakland at the time. I used to joke, like, maybe I'll go do PR for Clorox and like sell bleach wipes or whatever. I don't know, like, screw this. But my passion and my anger and my rage at the illiberalism and the dehumanization that we saw from Trump and from the MAGA movement is why I am here talking about this with you. And I'm not trying to create an equivalent. And obviously, as I said at the top, it is much, much worse when it is leaders of a movement or a party that are acting illiberally, that are dehumanizing, that are trying to undermine our democratic system. And the gap between Democratic leaders and Republican leaders on this front is so wide that you can't even see it with the naked eye. And yet, I still just cannot abide anyone even feeling just the tiniest bit confused about whether I might be a fellow traveler with them if they think it's okay to post "Hey, fascist, catch" on social media. I am not. I'm not in the business of trading one form of illiberalism for another, and I'm never going to be. So that's what I got for you. Up next, Bill Kristol. All right, everybody. Inflation isn't going anywhere. Our pockets are getting tight. We might have some Trumpian stagflation ahead. And everybody knows there are things you can do to reduce monthly costs and improve your finances. But who has the time to kind of go through all their expenses and really figure it out and figure out what's worth it to cut? Well, with Rocket Money, crunching the numbers for you, this all gets a lot easier. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. Just to be clear, not the Bulwark Plus. Okay, that is a very valuable and key subscription, and we all appreciate you so much. So much we appreciate you. If you're not a Bulwark Plus subscriber, maybe adding $10 a month. Not a big deal. Rocket Money to help you balance that out by finding the worthless, dumb subscriptions you're still paying for. It monitors your spending and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money shows you all your expenses in one place, including subscriptions you forgot about. If you see a subscription you no longer want, Rocket Money will help you cancel it. There's a dashboard that lays out your total financial picture, including bill due dates and paydays in a way that's easy to digest. You can even automatically create custom budgets based on your past spending. I guess it just occurs to me that as I'm reading this ad, if you're listening to this ad, you're not a Bulwark Plus member yet, because Bulwark Plus members get ad-free shows. So that's something to think about. My ad reads are really fun now. So, it kind of cuts both ways. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/thebulwark today. That's rocketmoney.com/thebulwark. rocketmoney.com/thebulwark. Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. It is Monday, and so we're here with editor-at-large Bill Kristol. Bill, boy, how thrilled are you to podcast today?
Well, I didn't say it again.
How thrilled are you to be podcasting with me today? Great.
I'm always thrilled to be podcasting with you, Tim, especially when you're upbeat, big LSU victory over the weekend. I know that was your big tailgating. Was that the first home game you've been to this year? Or?
First home game. Was a good win. The defense is unbelievable.
And
it's
I was texting
2011 defense.
Is that right? I was talking to Lauren Egan, our colleague, Lauren Egan, huge Vanderbilt fan. She has tickets there, and they're off to an undefeated start too. So that game, you're going to go up to Nashville for that game in a month. It's going to be
a showdown, October 18th.
Intra-Bulwark tensions will rise. It'll be good.
It was not on my schedule, but Vandy's looking good. So maybe I'll have to make an exception. All right. Well, from that upbeat note, I want to start.
I did my best. I would like to say I did my best to pretend to be vaguely upbeat and to be living in a normal America where we can focus on college football. And for 45 seconds of this podcast, I'd like the record to show that.
Well, I just got about half of my annoyances out in a monologue before you came on about all things relate Charlie Kirk assassination. So I just kind of want to give you the floor. I'm wondering what you're seeing out there and what your main reactions are.
Very bad when someone gets murdered, assassinated. It's very bad when the reaction is immediately polarized and politicized. When on all sides, though, I think with more culpability and impact on the right, in the sense that you have the President of the United States leading that reaction and weaponizing it. You have a lot of people online on the left saying stupid and foolish and offensive things, but not really many. Almost all Democratic politicians, I think, and I'd say sort of respectable liberal opinion types have been pretty responsible. So it's asymmetrical, but not good in either way, honestly. Assassinations are a bad thing to unleash. One does tend to lead to another if you look at history, and so you just don't want to be living in a country where this becomes routine, and it has become more common, right? I mean, the Minnesota assassination, which people didn't talk as much about, but that was an assassination of elected officials. That hasn't happened that often in U.S. history, and it happened. And actually, it was kind of memory hold pretty quickly, and
in their homes, in a particularly
totally ideological motive. I mean, lists of Democrats and so forth. No question about that motive. Would have been nice to have had a president of the United States on the other side from these Democrats who would have denounced it, which I just do want to make that one point. I mean, every president we've ever had would have done that.
Yes.
Nixon, Carter, you like him, you don't like him. Some of them were not great on everything else. And race makes it a little more complicated, but let's just say leaving that aside, maybe. Every president we've ever had would have felt compelled and felt it his duty. And it would have been a real duty and a real public good to make clear that this is unacceptable. And we have a president who didn't make that clear 3 months ago. We have some people not saying it on the left now, and that's very bad.
Yeah, I just to your point, like the contrast you've got today, like J.D. Vance is hosting Charlie's podcast to do a tribute to him, which is, again, is fine, his right. They had a big Kennedy Center thing last night. RFK Jr. was talking about how Charlie Kirk was his soulmate. It's a very strange thing to say. And, there will be a big memorial next Sunday, I think, in Arizona. Just, again, like the contrast between that, and it would have been appropriate. Maybe they didn't want him, but it would have been appropriate for J.D. Vance to have offered to speak at the memorial of Melissa Hortman. Or that contrast is pretty noteworthy.
It'd be nice if J.D. Vance invited on his podcast today the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, who's been responsible in his statements. It'd be nice if he invited on some Democrats who got out of their way to express their revulsion and horror at this murder. Yeah. Do you think he will?
Right. No. I don't think so. I think we're getting the other side. And you guys wrote in Morning Shots about Stephen Miller as kind of the locus of this effort to use the government to weaponize this tragedy against Americans. He writes, he said this, the power of law enforcement under President Trump's leadership will be used to find you, will be used to take away your money, take away your power, and if you've broken the law, take away your freedom. That was Stephen Miller talking about, I guess, activists, left groups and protesters and Soros and troublemakers and kind of this whole grab bag of villains that they are trying to create out of this. That's a pretty alarming sentiment. What you guys wrote about. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and the you in that sentence is, I mean, we don't know who that you is. It can be a very wide swath of people he and Donald Trump don't like or who have criticized them or who at different times have criticized Charlie Kirk, or organizations that fund people who haven't been sufficiently respectful, they would judge, of Kirk's achievements after his death. I mean, the degree to which we are looking at Miller says this explicitly, right, a government-led onslaught against the, quote, power and the money of people who apparently haven't broken the law. If you've broken the law, you're going to lose your freedom. I don't know, presumably there would be trials. I don't, maybe not. Maybe it'd just be martial law at that point. But for everyone else, at least the government's going to go after your power and your money. And again, that everyone else is a very broad group. Since Stephen Miller is the person who said the entire Democratic Party is, what did he say, domestic terrorists? Just last week, right? So I mean, by his own account, you might say, this is not people who are writing it as if he's going after some radical left groups and thinking deep down, well, I'm not part of that. If you are in any way part of the opposition to Donald Trump, you are part of what Stephen Miller is targeting.
Yeah, it's while we focus on grammar for a second, you're talking about the kind of undefined you, and this is what we've seen from Trump and from a lot of MAGA leaders is the undefined you and the undefined they, right? I mean, this was a rant that I went on following the attempted assassination of Trump in Butler last year, which was just the degree of irresponsibility among leaders at the top of the Republican Party talking about how they wanted him dead. Even like the more traditional old school type of Republicans who just stuck around for MAGA were doing this, right? Like it was completely widespread. Like they were going after him. They wanted to jail him. They wanted to kill him. And that does contribute to this notion that like we have some civil war happening in this country and that it is justified to go after this undefined they, undefined you, right? Like that, is something that just should be called out every time people see it in public, because it's important to force them to actually talk about what really happened, right? And like what really happened is not, in both those cases, is extremely bad, but is not part of some civil war, some generational struggle, right? It's in the case of Trump getting arrested, it was specific grand juries like looked at evidence and decided that he had done wrongdoing with specific people. In the case of Butler, it seems like just a loner kid that had too easy access to firearms, and it could have been any famous person that came to his town. In this case, we don't quite know exactly yet, but we're still going to find out more. But even still, it's just one guy. It's one young guy who lived in a MAGA family in Utah. You saw people over the weekend talking about how the college radicalized him. Like he went to some technical college in Utah. Right? Like it's not like he went Wellesley and got radicalized by the far leftists, right? He went to Orem, Provo, Utah, then went to St. George, Utah. He's like one of the reddest parts of the country. I think that in talking about it, the responsible way to do it is obviously to condemn this in all forms, but to talk about what it really is, to try to identify what the real problems are that need to be addressed. This administration doesn't have any interest in that. They have interest in using it to go after their political foes and to try to broaden it out beyond what it really is and create a greater struggle, greater troubles, if you will, than we have now.
Yeah, and to encourage really vigilante violence pretty directly, I would say, almost. And also to threaten, as we were saying, to use the force of the federal government now that Trump and Stephen Miller are in charge of that again. So that's very different from denouncing some, there could be some reckless rhetoric that might lead some people to do this. That's sort of, I think, a reasonable thing to do if you cite particular rhetoric and maybe there's some connection to the shooter. Again, what's striking in the case of the assault on the murder of the Minnesota representative and her husband, and then the assault on a colleague of hers and I think it was his spouse where they were very badly wounded. That was explicitly political. And I don't recall Democrats then saying, they might have said, Trump and his people should be more careful about their rhetoric, but that was about it. They did not say, they didn't use anything approaching the kind of rhetoric that Trump and Miller and Vance are using in this case. And the whole MAGA movement is fully seems to be on board this blaming everyone who is not part of MAGA, basically, honestly, or is not at least willing to acquiesce in MAGA's dominance of America. You're not just part of the problem. You're not just, insufficiently attentive to MAGA's concerns. You are basically a domestic terrorist. Maybe they'll tolerate you using your rights of free speech and being holding your job and so forth for a certain amount of time. But basically, you are not in any way a fellow American citizen. Maybe I overstated that a little bit, but I think the rhetoric is pretty dangerous and very dangerous and pretty appalling. And that's for sort of the big picture, the big you and they, as you correctly say. And then the demonizing of particular groups, obviously, subgroups, is really, really dangerous and terrible.
Yeah, a lot there. So just a couple thoughts. Just briefly, I should just say also the way that they're going after people. I mean, they literally have a list that they're gathering of people who said wrong thoughts about Charlie Kirk, that they want fired from their jobs, which shows you about how genuine the whole cancel culture fake outrage was with these guys, of course. But they do want to punish people and target them, right? Like there is an effort to do that, an effort to go after them. And I think it's the most acute on the trans issue, of course. You mentioned it, but I guess just to give people the facts here of what we know so far. Governor Cox on ABC this weekend said that the shooter lived with a romantic partner who was undergoing a gender transition. He said also that the roommate was aghast at the slaying when speaking to investigators and was cooperating. So I do think that's an important thing to say, at least based on what we know. This was not like was stoking it or whatever. Yet I don't think that fact is going to stop what we all have already seen and what is all coming, which is a campaign of demonization, of dehumanization of trans people. You posted over the weekend, it should be needless to say, but it is perhaps at this moment worth saying that transgender individuals have the same right as anyone else's to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's not hard to see where this is going, I guess.
I got to say, Spencer Cox has been pretty good, and I agree with a lot of the praise of him. He didn't need to say all this stuff on Sunday. It's not appropriate. He's the governor of the state. He hasn't done his own investigation. He doesn't know what's hearsay and what's real. He doesn't know if people are saying things to, I don't know, for whatever reason. I'm not saying they are, but I feel like even he is not, quite following the right protocol and the norms of how one conducts a serious investigation of this kind. But anyway, he said a little. As you say, maybe he was saying it with a certain good intention to say that the roommate was cooperating and therefore shouldn't be held accountable. But the roommate's not accountable anyway. I mean, it's all ridiculous, right? I mean, just as the wife of the 57-year-old murderer in Minneapolis isn't accountable, unless that person is accountable and was a co-conspirator, in which case, fine, then that will come out in the investigation and in court, and the person might be indicted and so forth. But to sort of this kind of this holding any relationship one has with a trans person, we're now going to, any person who commits a crime or has such a relationship that's going to be blamed on trans individuals, on trans rights, or human rights for transgender people. I mean, it really is appalling. And the targeting there is just so over the top. And I will say, Charlie Kirk engaged in some of that himself. He was not careful in what he said. He's entitled to have his views, obviously, but he was not careful in the way he framed his objections to the extension of human rights to transgender individuals. So,
yeah, and you can tell they wanted this fight, obviously, from the start, right? And like initially, it's like, oh, the bullets had trans stuff on it. No, they didn't. Oh, the shooter might be trans. No, that's not true. Oh, the roommate is trans, right? Like it's like you're desperate for grasping for any way to kind of demonize that community. To your point on Cox, I just want to echo on both points. I think that obviously compared to a lot of other MAGA leaders right now, his tone has been much better. That said, both on this trans issue and on like the shooter's motivations, right, I do feel like he's freelancing on that quite a bit. And I think that I've seen a lot of freelancing in a lot of places, particularly from a lot of old people who could not possibly translate the like meme culture frames on from the Helldivers video game that was on these bullets, right? I mean, I'm getting old. I was trying to explain it to my husband, who was like, "What is OWO?" Right? Like, we don't like this person is 22 years old, is deep into internet subcultures, and I think that we're going to learn more about what the views are, but it was intentionally ironic and cryptic, some of what that he's putting on there. And maybe Spencer Cox knows some stuff that we don't know yet, I guess. But I think that he's speaking in a way that's a little bit definitive about motivation when he's a person as a post-middle-age Mormon man that just doesn't. I just don't know how well he can translate for people what was in the head of this young.
No, and he
young
shouldn't
killer.
be trying to. Just to be obvious,
right.
He's the governor of the state. He should be reporting what is real facts, but not trying to put himself in the head of a suspect, presumably the alleged murderer. I guess we should say it that way, but presumably the murderer, who isn't apparently cooperating, hasn't, therefore, one gathers, spoken directly to law enforcement about his motives, and didn't seem to leave a manifesto. So how do we know? We really, literally don't know. And I very much take your point about people my age should not be even pretending we have the foggiest idea of what's going on in gamer world in terms of the 8 levels of bizarre irony and self-referential stuff that's going on in these inscriptions and that all that world. Let me just put it that way. But even if you were a 23-year-old hipster, you wouldn't know what's in his mind, right?
Sure.
Which really makes it irresponsible.
Yes.
So we've been a little tougher on Cox. We should come back to close the loop by reiterating that he's been better than 99% of Republicans, which of course tells you
that's great.
Which tells you a lot. Great. They should all be at worst like like Governor Cox,
right? Yes, absolutely. If you're new to life insurance, you're not alone. Thankfully, I found SelectQuote. For over 40 years, SelectQuote has helped more than 2 million Americans understand their options and get the coverage they need. Over $700 billion in coverage and counting. As a broker, their mission is simple: to find you the right insurance policy at the best price. They take the guesswork out of finding that insurance policy. You don't have to sort through dozens of confusing options on your own. Instead, one of their agents will find the right policy at the right price for you, comparing plans from trusted, top-rated insurance companies to find something that fits your health, your lifestyle, and your budget. And they work for you for free. And you're not out of luck if you have pre-existing health conditions, because SelectQuote partners with companies that offer policies for people with high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, and other conditions. Life insurance is never cheaper than it is today. Get the right life insurance for you for less and save more than 50% at selectquote.com/bulwark. Save more than 50% on term life insurance at selectquote.com/bulwark today to get started. That's selectquote.com/bulwark. One other person you've mentioned in the newsletter and on Twitter, so I just wanted to bring it up. I talked briefly to From about this on Friday, kind of taking out the lens and looking at the global side of this. I want to talk about the protests in UK in a second, but we had Putin's Bannon, if you will. I kind of hate that I'd give that credit to Bannon, but it's just the best shorthand, I think, for it. It's, if you want to, Dugin, who I fancies himself kind of a philosopher of some kind, wrote a Substack, From Ukraine to Utah, One Global War. And you just talked earlier about like how we're seeing some of this in Stephen Miller, and also the way to try to like turn what very well might be just a mentally ill kid's, horrible choice and too easy access to weapons and all of that into like some broader like cultural civil war that we're saying that's not even just America but globally, and to directly try to tie the Russia-Ukraine war to this, I think is pretty noteworthy. Why did you find it noteworthy enough to mention it a couple times?
Yeah, I mean, Dugin really is Putin's court philosopher. I guess you're right. Bannon's combination of Bannon and I suppose Michael Anton and, some of Peter Thiel's more recondite, thinking about Carl Schmitt and all this stuff. It's more like Carl Schmitt, if you want a historical example, the Nazi jurist who justified and provided a rationale for much that the Nazis did, but himself before that a distinguished, professor at German universities. And Dugin, in his own way, has written he's written long books that some people have taken very seriously. He's basically a fascist, and Putin's, he therefore he's on board with Putin, and Putin's on board with him. What's striking is he has some qualifications about his admiration for MAGA, not quite where he would be on every issue, wants them to be on every issue, but they're in the right place. They are the American front of this global war between, I will use terms he doesn't quite use, but he almost does, between fascism and liberalism. Liberalism he uses, he's against it, but whatever you want to call his version of fascism. So that doesn't mean that everyone in MAGA is like Dugin, obviously. Be nice if someone in MAGA repudiated Dugin and Dugin's endorsement, but it is telling that that's how he sees it, and I think he's being honest in his judgment there, and unfortunately, MAGA world has given him enough material, you might say, to work with on this.
As mentioned, there was the march in England over the weekend. Far right activist Tommy Robinson, who is anti-migrant and also doesn't fully map onto America. It's kind of anti-cop in a way, because I think that the cops are sort of in line with the liberal leadership. But anyway, he is a far right activist and provocateur, really. Their march drew over 100,000 people, and I saw it in several places of people on the right, on the MAGA right, celebrating this. Like I saw people calling it like the biggest nationalist march or rally that they've seen in Europe. There were some clashes with police officers. I bring it up just because I think also in the context of the reaction we've seen to Kirk. Let me just caveat this at the top. I'm the type of LSU fan where after a big win, I'm like, we're going to win the championship. And after a loss, I'm like, we're never going to win again. Like sometimes I'm a little too emotional in reacting to recent events. And I try to be thoughtful about putting things into context. But it does, I guess there's a concerning amount of momentum that I see on the illiberal right here and in Europe, certain parts of Europe at least. And that march happening the same time, you saw this kind of outpouring of support for Kirk. It's alarming to me.
It is. I mean, I don't follow British politics as much as I used to, and
Sure.
Someone like Robinson so loathsome it's hard to even read about him. But I mean, he is far right. He's beyond Farage. He's beyond the sort of let's call it the equivalent almost of Trump and MAGA world here, I would say, and is often to
It'd
kind
be
of
almost closer to like the Proud Boys or something.
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
Laura
Belkey or
Loomer,
something
Proud
like that,
Boys, Fuente, is that his name? What's the
Fuentes, yeah.
Fuentes? Is that his name?
Fuentes, yeah.
Kind of in
But even
that.
he's kind of like a little bitch. Like I don't like he's kind of a little wimpy guy. Like and he's very far right, but like Robinson has the stochastic violence side,
totally,
of him, right?
Yeah.
Like with him, yeah.
Yeah. So really, right? I mean, and 100,000 people is not good. And Elon Musk spoke by video hook up to it. So he's on board with them, just as he was on board with the AfD, the neo-Nazi party in Germany. I mean, the degree of international coordination, or at least support for each other on the far right, and as you say, and the movement of the far right, further right, and the accelerationist, if you want, element of what's happening on the right is terrible. I mean, very, very dangerous. I mean, Robinson is basically pro-violence against migrants. I'm going to say this, and now he'll probably sue us if this is shown in London. So I'll qualify it by saying I'm not familiar with everything he said, but I think he's pretty far out there. And
there's a vibe of that. That's what the kids are saying. Yeah. The vibe gives off pro-violence
Nick
against
Cohen
migrants.
is a very respectable, very sober center-left British columnist. Wrote that this was the largest collection of the largest far right march since Oswald Mosley's fascist march in London, the Union of Fascists, I think they were called, in the 30s in Britain, and explicitly pro-fascist. And they also had a march of 100,000 people in London. One forgets how popular fascism was all around the world in the 30s. And so if Nick Cohen said that, and is very alarmed about it. I think we are entitled to be too. But again, the fact that Musk is, all the ties between these groups and the relishing of the fact that everyone's getting more extreme. I mean, that is very dangerous. But these things have a momentum of their own. We've talked about that before. And
I want to do something a little constructive on this front rather than just lamenting all of it. I hope that this is a flashpoint, like kind of a series of events for liberals, and I'm using that word particularly, to try to create a kind of a counter movement against this. I think that for all of the accurate negative things that could be said about Charlie Kirk, this isn't really even a value judgment. The one thing that I could say, just without caveat, positive about him is he put in real work to organize young people, to communicate his views, his ideology to young people, and to engage with them and get them involved. And when I went to TPUSA last year, and the article was like 90% all the gross, horrible things that I saw, but the 10% at the top was like, that we could use this, right? Whatever you want to call us, the pro-democracy side, the Democrats, the liberals, whatever, any we that you find yourself identifying with could use something like this. That communicates and galvanizes people against just illiberalism throughout the world and these kind of far right activities in particular. And anyway, I don't know exactly. This is something that's just been banging around my head all weekend. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it is something that I want to put out into the world because I think that this is a good instigating moment for liberals to start to think about how they can actually put more effort into, to use a now out of vogue word, community organizing young people that are open to hearing the message.
No, I very much agree with that. I mean, I think there's different levels of different kinds of efforts, and some of them, someone like me is better at, maybe, or more familiar with, let me say, more suited to than others. There's a kind of intellectual effort of, rejuvenating liberalism, recreating it for the 21st century. There's a, let's call it, political kind of elite effort, you might say, of bringing together different elements of the coalition so they work together and so forth. And then there's this much more grassroots movement effort, and they're all
indivisible stuff.
And they're all important, and they should all be broad-based as much as possible, in my opinion. It was one moment of I got really very depressed this weekend as I happened on social media somewhere to notice that there's some fight. I didn't really see what caused it. between Chris Van Hollen and Hakeem Jeffries about something or other, and staff were sniping at each other. And I thought, I mean, really? And I think it was maybe Van Hollen said everyone should support Mamdani, and Jeffries should already have done so since he's from New York. And Jeffries' staffer was like, well, stay in your lane, or who cares about Chris Van Hollen or something. And so they're actually spending time sniping at each other on something that's utterly unimportant. I mean, it's important, I guess, who's the next mayor of New York. It's utterly unimportant when Hakeem Jeffries supports him. The voters of New York City are not waiting to hear from Hakeem Jeffries on this. I'm going to just assert.
Which is the reason why you should just support him, by the way. But
totally,
also,
I agree. Yeah. If I were asked, I would say that. But the idea that this is the moment to let's have a lot of really fun intra-democratic fights, and let's have the centrists attack the left and the left attack the center, and Young attack all. I mean, it's not that they should suppress their opinions about various things. But there's going to be a shutdown. I fight about a shutdown in 2 weeks. Maybe the members of Congress who do actually have to coordinate their effort. The rest of us don't have to. We can say whatever we want, I suppose. Yeah. Maybe they should actually work a little harder on that and not sort of, I don't know. So I do feel like, yes, the opposition could use improving on a lot of different of these, on all these areas, the intellectual, the political, and the one you've mentioned, which is so important, the kind of organizing, I guess you call it. Yeah,
I agree with that. And just since you mentioned Zoran, again, like he was a flashpoint for getting people involved, right? In a way, and like in some ways that were not specifically how I wish it would happen, but it was working, and people are getting involved and excited in New York. Now he's going to have a real big job of trying to govern the biggest city in the country well, should he win. So he's not really the person for this, but like that same notion like could be channeled towards a more broad-based activation of young people throughout the country. And it's just, you look out and like, who's doing that?
Right.
And it's hard to kind of think about that. I mean, like you could throw out some names, but they would feel insufficient, I guess.
And one footnote to that, my impression, I saw something quickly that he had said, I think at a rally or something over the weekend, was responsible about Charlie Kirk.
His was great. I played it.
Oh, okay. Well, good. You're ahead of me.
Was it on Thursday? Yeah, I played it on Thursday because it was really, really good.
Yeah, so
really
all this talk about the left has gone this way. He's the most prominent leftist Democrat running for office, not quite, in office, in state office right now in America. I guess he and AOC, and he was utterly responsible and did not say any of the things that Trump and Stephen Miller are saying the radical left types are saying, right? So it really does show, from I now having complained about the Democrats for a while, it shows that they are so much more responsible. Yeah. And I
would just say one more thing about the left, just as this is not, again, as I specifically chose the word liberal because of how I identify myself, after having myself complained in the intro about how some regular Americans in my life were responding to this tragedy. The two... gosh, I'm really gassing this guy up by saying this right now, but probably the two most prominent leftists, to use that word, like, well, maybe three most are, you mentioned AOC and Zoran, and then the streamer Hassan Piker. And all of their responses were extremely responsible. And Hassan is tamping down the people in his comments who were doing the opposite. And they were all talking about the importance of people being able to speak in a free country. And that is really encouraging. And so I just want to say that. Hey, everybody, we are going on the road this fall, and I want to see you. Sadly, our Toronto tickets have already sold out, so I'm plotting a return to Canada. You guys just wait on that. But come together with me, Sarah, and JVL for 2 nights of camaraderie and joy and resistance and podcasting and maybe some special guests at the DC event. We might give a big middle finger to the masked agents of Donald Trump that are roaming the city's free streets. And we'll be back in New York a couple times later. The first time we've been in New York in ages. The last time we had a live New York event, I can remember because it was during the Nuggets title run. And me and a handful of folks who came out went and watched Jamal Murray put up 40, I think, on the Lakers after the podcast. It was quite enjoyable. Maybe we'll have a similar night. We'll see. And if you really want more time with us, and you don't want to just place a bet that you'll end up at the same bar with me after, because you never know, you could pay for VIP tickets. They're included in the sale. It'll give you earlier entry into the show, and you can hang with us for an intimate Q&A. You can check out all the details and get tickets at thebulwark.com/events. For more, that's thebulwark.com/events. See you all on the East Coast. The other big news of the morning that I want to get to is related to China and TikTok. Trump sent this bleat this morning. The big trade meeting in Europe between the U.S. and China has gone very well, all caps. It will be concluding shortly. A deal was also reached on a, quote, certain company that young people in our country very much wanted to save. They will be very happy. I will be speaking to President Xi on Friday. The relationship remains a strong one, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Donald Trump really loves Xi. And that is a lot of exclamation points to use when talking about how much you're friends with somebody. Since that, Bessent has now come out and said what Trump was implying by saying that they have a framework for a TikTok deal. And I thought this was the most grotesque part of all of this, was that this statement from Bessent at the end. They have a deal between two private parties. Then he goes on. The two leaders, President Trump and party chair Xi, will speak on Friday to complete the deal.
Wow.
Is that how things work here? Like the president of the United States has to stamp off a private deal between a private company in a foreign country? It's one of our adversaries and us. Like Trump and Xi are the same. Like we have state-run deal making now when it comes to social media accounts, I guess.
Well, what do you make when it comes to other corporations as well? It turns out, right? Intel and stuff. Yeah. I mean, Trump is being taken to the cleaners by Xi, is my sense, as he has been by Putin, and some of our Trump accommodating or acquiescing foreign policy hawks thought, okay, we can work to get him okay on Ukraine. And anyway, at least he'll be tough on China. That's the one thing. He'll really be tough on China. That's the real competitor for the 21st century, Bill. And you're a little too obsessed with the Europe stuff and some of these NATO. That's kind of old school. And this Xi, he's going to really be tough. Look how tough he was in the first term. And he was somewhat tough in the first term. But now it's been
up until that last year and a half where we wanted the trade deal.
Right. So the trade deal always cut against the Pompeos and the others in the administration who were authentically, I think, pretty anti-China, sometimes in intelligent ways and useful ways, sometimes somewhat silly ways, but still. Trump's just thrown all that under the bus, and he's now all in on a trade deal with Xi and let them have whatever chips they need to improve their semiconductors, and let them have obviously no political challenge to them. We're not going to let the president of Taiwan travel through the U.S. I mean, yeah, it's all fake. It's hard to know how much of the China toughness was always fake among a lot of Republicans, just a kind of bellicosity, because they sort of vaguely think that if you're for American greatness, you can't just be for being a wimp. But you don't actually do anything about Ukraine, where there's actually a massive, brutal assault on an ally in Europe by Putin. But, we can pretend to be tough on China. Nothing's happening there, really. But now that's beginning to collapse. And so, yes, Trump's getting along with the dictators everywhere.
Yeah, the relationship remains a very strong one. Heart eyes emoji. It's just like, okay, whatever.
What's good, Tim? What's good, Tim, is that I
think that's the right posture.
What's good, Tim, is that the Republican hawks, Senator Cotton, and all the theorists of the anti-China side of the Republican Party, who are also, pro-Trump, they'll speak out. They're going to call Trump on this. They're not going to just roll over. The people who screamed and yelled about TikTok 18 months ago, and who screamed and yelled about Taiwan, and screamed and yelled, again, not without some reason in some cases, about the balance in Asia and so forth, they're going to call it the way it is. They're going to call balls and strikes on this. And I wonder who will call it. I guess the Wall Street Journal might, do you think? I don't know. National Review, but any actual elected official, no way, right? Yeah, no, I'm just being obviously
so. I don't know. Rand, one of the libertarians, like Rand.
Yeah, well, they're against being hawkish also.
Other than China anyway, yeah, you're right.
No, but I'm being obviously sarcastic when I say, they're not going to, of course they're not. They're going to work quietly, though. Behind the scenes, they're going to really work hard to make Trump more responsible on this.
Don't believe so. Moving on to Russia. Trump, the other news on that front is he has said that he is willing to do harder sanctions on Europe. There's a sanctions bill on the Hill. Speaking of the bellicosity talk, Lindsey Graham keeps doing press conferences over on the Hill about how we're about ready. We're going to crush them. We got the sword of Damocles hanging over Russia's head. We're going to pass this bill any minute now. We're just waiting for Trump to tell us we can. We're just going to pass it. It's been ready. We have the co-sponsors. Trump said he's willing to do those hard sanctions only if Europe has to do it first. He wants to make sure Europe is getting no gas from Russia. that all of the countries are fully on board. He can't do it unless the Europeans are willing to sacrifice themselves. You wrote over the weekend, since President Putin's invitation to Alaska by Trump, the Russian leader has ramped up attacks in Ukraine, threatened to kill any future foreign forces in Ukraine, hit Western targets in Ukraine, and unleashed a drone incursion into Poland. And the response from Trump is once again, well, I'll be tough. Maybe we'll see. Let's give it another couple of weeks.
And the Europeans have been moderately tough on the Poland situation. It's right there. And didn't Trump have what was his important contribution on social media to that? I've not forget something last week.
Poland, it was like, it's really getting started now or something. It was just a surprise exclamation. And then when he's asked about it on the tarmac, he said something to the effect of like the drones got knocked down before they landed in Poland. So, not that big a deal.
I mean, the degree of weakness, there's been a lot of wishful thinking, in my opinion, the first 8 months of, well, he's not quite he said some bad things in February when Vance and Hexeth gave those speeches in Europe and all that. But, it's not quite as weak as you think, Bill. And it's not, there's some good things. It's all weakness. And that's very dangerous too. So he's very strong and persecuting. And I think that's a fair verb to use. People he doesn't like in launching the federal government against his enemies, his perceived enemies, his opponents, whom he thinks of as enemies here at home, and very weak against actual brutal dictatorships abroad. That's kind of the Trump doctrine, right? Attack transgender individuals who are minding their own business, 99.8% of them here at home, and do nothing against brutal dictators who are killing people abroad.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's good. I think that sums things up. I think we can kind of leave it there. I ended the pod last week with a reading of your newsletter. That's how good it was, about David Rose, who's killed. The police officer was killed at the CDC. So I figured we could see if you had any final thoughts or ruminations on that before we.
Well, it's encouraging that people like heroes like David Rose exist. He's a young man. He's almost the same age. It was a young man, almost the same age as Charlie Kirk. And for all the talk about social media and all the talk about how horrible our politics are, and they are pretty bad, David Rose grew up in America and came from American family, and it was a really admirable and heroic person, fought in Afghanistan, and then obviously ran to the gun, so to speak, here in Atlanta, and that assault on CDC, and was tragically killed. So there are people like David. I was talking to Jay Nordlinger on the Sunday Bulwark thing, and he's been at some college campuses, and we just talking about that in general. And he said he's heartened. So for whatever that, for all the talk, I do think the social media stuff is a little overdone, like it's ruining this whole job. I don't know. Are they so much worse than people my age, or like Donald Trump, or people J.G. Vance's age, who's your age basically, or I mean, so I take some heart from the fact.
What was he heartened by? I'm ready to be heartened.
And he said a lot of the students he meets are intelligent. They don't like Trump and Trumpism. They don't like the radical parts of the left that you criticized earlier, and so and therefore actual American greatness, which means tolerance at home and standing up to bullies abroad. But it'd be nice if there were more people reflecting that, I'd say, in our leadership, both political leadership, and there are some, but also let's call it civic leadership. That's the one thing I was struck by. I read some little thing over the weekend. If I can just close on this, the collapse of the elite institutions is also very damaging, right? I mean, will anyone? And that compounded with Trump and Miller creates a very dangerous situation, obviously.
Well, you had me encouraged.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
I was
final caveat. You added a final caveat.
Jay Nordlinger had some great conversations with students at college.
I agree with Jay.
So cheer up. Cheer up.
I find this as well. I go to campuses, and because I am sympathetic to the stated notion that a liberalism is happening on campuses, that like people are shouted down, people aren't free to kind of share their views if they're wrong thoughts or whatever. But I feel the same way when I'm on campuses. I always ask about that question. Like kids, do you feel like you have to self-censor? Do you feel like this? And maybe the people self-selecting to come see me talk are a different category from the broader campus or the broader generational cohort, which is why it's something I'm exploring in an FY pod and our other efforts to reach out to young folks. But I agree with that, and I think that there is some things that are alarming of course. But I also am heartened when I'm hearing from actual students who have to live this stuff every day. It's just, I don't know. It's just eventually it becomes too much, right? The overwhelming amount of the negativity in your face and in your feed every day. But we soldier on. All right, that's Bill Kristol. Quite an episode. I don't know if this one's going to go in our Hall of Fame, at the end of the process. But we did the best we could. We'll be back Monday. That's the good thing about this. We get to do it again next Monday, and who the fuck knows what's going to happen then? We'll see y'all then. We'll be back here tomorrow for another edition of the Bulwark podcast. Peace.